A few months ago, myself and a few friends got together and played Space Engineers, which is a sort of light survival sandbox game all about, you'll never guess, engineering stuff in space. Our plan was to create a massive carrier spaceship that would roam around the cosmos as a mobile base, and for a time, it was a great success. That was until we got caught in the gravity well of a nearby planet, didn't have the thrust to escape, and crash landed in spectacular fashion in the middle of nowhere with almost all of our progress in a flaming crater. We came very, very close to just calling it a day and restarting. After all, the situation was basically hopeless. But instead, we chose to try our best to salvage things, retrofitting our mining ships into terrestrial scouts, creating an entirely new energy infrastructure and engines out of scraps, and eventually, mining out a frozen ocean to make just enough hydrogen fuel to blast our ruined ship back into space and escape the horrible wolf-infested planet once and for all. It was a fantastic little journey, and one that never would have happened if we'd simply taken the easy way out and reverted to an older save, or just restarted. And that got me thinking. More and more, it feels like games, particularly more mainstream ones, are designed around trying to give players as many means as possible to avoid feeling like they failed, while still clinging to the apparent necessity of a failure state. We've got quick time events that pause to ensure you've always got enough time to hit the button, old school games updated to give you basically infinite lives, checkpoints that mean you only ever lose like 10 seconds of progress if you die, and multiplayer titles that put you up against dumb bots pretending to be players to ensure you always get a taste of victory. But I can't help but wonder that in protecting players' psyches from the feeling of defeat, we might lose something else as well. After all, if my friends and I had simply bailed after our spaceship crash, we would have missed out on a super cool adventure that only happened because our captain failed to pay attention to the radar. The problem with these loss aversion systems isn't the fact that companies are dumbing down their games for casuals, because that's simply not true, no matter what lesser video game critics would have you believe. Instead, I think stuff like quick loading, giving players an arbitrarily large number of lives, or whatever, are actually great for accessibility purposes, but they're often misappropriated to try and fix a more fundamental issue. Namely, that failure in games usually isn't very interesting. Alright, I know that doesn't sound like a revelation, but bear with me here. Whenever you lose in a game, whether that's dying, failing to complete some sort of objective, or simply being beaten by someone else, games more often than not become less entertaining as a result. You might have to respawn and replay through a bunch of stuff you've already done, or you might get weaker long term, or you might just get booted back to the title screen with nothing to show for it but a wasted hour and a feeling of shame. None of which I'd really call a good time. And so, when that's what you've got to look forward to whenever you lose, can you really blame players for reaching for the quick load or surrender button when something goes wrong, or developers for designing their games such that players don't really have to lose at all? Luckily for us, a collection of really great titles over the last few years have managed to buck this trend and recontextualize defeat by doing the impossible and making losing fun. Or, if not fun, then, at least interesting. So, how do they do this? Well, I think the key factor when it comes to making failure in games work is to think about it as a vector for interesting consequences, rather than just as an excuse to arbitrarily punish the player for losing. Look at Strange Horticulture, for example. A puzzle game with a sort of health system represented by your sanity. Recommend the wrong plants to people, and you'll lose sanity. Lose too much, and you have to play a little minigame, then the game boots you back to the start of that day. But no matter what you do, the puzzles don't change, nor do the flowers you find to populate your shop. All you've actually lost is time. The result of your failure is just sort of you being bored for a bit while you catch back up to where you lost all your sanity, knowing exactly what all the answers are and what you're gonna find. Which isn't a whole lot of fun, and doesn't exactly encourage you to keep playing after you've lost, does it? Instead of making the result of defeat a temporarily worse gameplay experience, I think the best games that manage to make failure a natural and meaningful part of gameplay use it as a way of upping the stakes or adding some new wrinkle to gameplay that encourages players to jump back in. Shovel Knight is a great example here. Despite aping a large number of old school platformers, Yacht Club realised that an archaic system of lives and game overs isn't really necessary anymore, because it's not like we're paying to play Shovel Knight in an arcade. Instead, they made it so that when you die, you drop a bunch of money Dark Souls style, and in so doing, death goes from being a natural stopping point to a tense raising of the stakes as you try and rush through the level to recapture your lost gold, keeping you completely engaged, even through the bullshit that is Tinker Knight stage. Battle Royales have also learned a similar lesson. Back in the dark primordial days of Minecraft Hunger Games and DayZ mods, Battle Royales were legendarily punishing, with games lasting upwards of 30 minutes and often ending in seconds from a stray sniper shot you didn't even see coming. It was tense, but not particularly fulfilling to lose. This prompted the development of stuff like Apex Legends respawn beacons that allow you to resurrect teammates if you can grab their player card from their corpse and bring it to a particular point. Losing a player is obviously still a fairly major downside, but rather than just putting your team at a permanent disadvantage, death introduces a new secondary objective to play towards in order to bring your teammate back, as well as some fun new problems to solve as you attempt to re-gear your friend before the fighting starts back up. It's also worth mentioning the Gulag in Call of Duty Warzone, which puts dead players in a 1v1 deathmatch where the winner gets to come back to life. It's incredibly hype and allows even the loser to go out when the stakes are at their highest, rather than to some random ambush. Even survival horror games operate on the same kind of principle. Missing a critical shotgun shot or having to use a knife to fend off a zombie doesn't just mean you narrowly avoided dying, that mistake reverberates into the rest of the game via the resource management element, making using your remaining bullets, grenades and medicine intelligently all the more important, pushing you to think cleverly and challenge yourself to play efficiently in order to conserve your resources. Of course, this sentiment of prioritizing interesting gameplay consequences over punishments doesn't just apply to death and injury. Many less immediately morbid games can also create interesting consequences for messing up. Look at Potionomics, a management-y game all about brewing and selling potions where you wheel and deal using card game mechanics. Failing to make a sale or not countering the abilities of your customers increases your stress, which in turn raises the likelihood of you drawing useless stress cards, further impacting your ability to make money. Rather than outright locking out this crucial part of the game, or forcing you to replay messed up sales however, Potionomics instead pushes players to choose between taking the risk of selling potions with a compromised deck, nerfing their deck even more to play stress reduction cards, or to spend precious time units de-stressing by hanging out with their friends. Coincidentally, spending time with the other characters is also how you unlock new cards for your deck and get discounts on various services, meaning the players who are struggling don't get left behind and they can quickly come back with a new strategy and catch back up. In this way, using failure as a way to force interesting decisions on the player is a much more effective means of building up tension and strategic depth than just sort of killing you for making a mistake, which often serves to reset the player's stress level rather than heightening it. One of the main problems with games using very simplistic, definitive failure states like a game over or a boot back to a checkpoint is that it's difficult for them to maintain a cohesive and immersive feeling player experience. Many games that use lives or checkpointing end up treating the possibility of you making a mistake as this weird, gamey contrivance that's not really supposed to happen, and the canonical story is you literally never getting hit or failing to do anything, creating a weird disconnect between how you play and the story being conveyed because there's literally no middle ground between perfection and defeat. Some games, like Call of Duty, are so unable to reconcile the possibility of the player dying with the cool action story they want to tell, that they just straight up make you immortal and script every enemy death without telling you to remove the possibility of you ruining the set piece by messing up. It doesn't work for all games for obvious reasons, but by making losing an organic part of a game's ludonarrative experience, it's much easier for games to cultivate and maintain a specific vibe, and the best games do this by having smaller, more granular failure states that can flow together much more smoothly than an abrupt game over. In my eyes, no game does this better than Darkest Dungeon, a strategy RPG all about doomed heroes going insane and getting murdered by a variety of horrible beasties. Despite how punitive Darkest Dungeon gets, it has an incredibly wide spectrum of ways things can go wrong. Characters don't just die when they hit 1 health, they enter death's door, which simply means they have a chance of dying when hit, and characters go insane at 100 stress, gaining a semi-permanent floor, but they don't actually die until they hit 200, which is pretty hard to do. Beyond even that, characters can get permanent malices and diseases as a result of their adventures that may or may not be more trouble than they're worth. By not simply killing characters off when a skeleton splashes them with sand juice, but instead maiming and psychologically breaking them, Darkest Dungeon is able to tell much more affecting emergent stories of gradual corruption. And that's not even counting the fact that heroes are easily replaced with most of your investment going into the town itself, and that you only really lose Darkest Dungeon if you go into the final mission unprepared, making even the loss of an entire team a temporary setback at worst. Okay, fine, yes, you can lose if you run out of time on Stygian difficulty, but let's be honest, no one is insane enough to actually play that, and if you claim you have done, you're lying. Compare the way Darkest Dungeon works to other tactics games with permadeath. Much more of your investment goes into individual characters, meaning that if they die, you can find yourself completely screwed long term. But in Darkest Dungeon, you can easily scoop up some new recruits and have them geared up in no time, ready to die for you all over again. Isn't losing fun? Speaking of which, the game that arguably coined the phrase losing is fun is Dwarf Fortress, and its highly systemic approach to things going horribly wrong is why it's generated so many fun stories of failure and ruin over the years. Dwarf Fortress does, however, look and play like garbage, so I'll demonstrate the same point with its spiritual successor, RimWorld, a game that bills itself as an interactive story generator that also does most of the same things. RimWorld is at times incredibly punishing, but by forcing players to roll with the punches and deal with the consequences of poor planning or just plain bad luck, events that would otherwise stymie a playthrough become these great emergent narrative touchstones. For example, a great story came about from a colony of mine that had a bunch of animal tamers raising deer to farm for milk, but didn't have much in the way of defenses. So I sent my colony's leader and only doctor to tame what I thought would be some battle birds, from an excellent series of mods by the way, to defend the base from attackers, only for one of them to immediately turn around and rip my doctor's throat out, with the rest of my dumb idiot colonists being too incompetent to save her. This led to me eventually gambling everything on opening up a buried set of cryopods in the hope of finding a replacement doctor to bribe into joining the colony, only for the pod people to be pissed and have a bunch of guns, proceeding to execute my medieval level advanced scouts. The reawakened cryo soldiers then invaded my base, murdered everyone else, and burnt the place to the ground, the only survivors being my pet deer, who quickly returned to nature, their master escape plan complete. If losing my doctor instantly lost me the game, then this story wouldn't have been anywhere near as fun, even if it was the start of my inescapable downward spiral. While it is harder to marry a more linear, traditionally delivered story, and this approach of integrating a player's losses into their overall progression arc, it's not impossible. All it takes is a slightly more flexible approach to what failure means. Look at Hellblade, for example. It's a highly narrative-focused game that utilizes death to put you in the shoes of its main character, Senua. Hellblade's combat is pretty hard, and not always fair, something that's complicated by the fact that whenever you die, this horrible black rot that Senua is infected with grows a little bit more. If it reaches her head, that's it. Game over for good. This permanent consequence to death, which I won't explain the exact mechanics of, is brilliant at injecting this subtle but inescapable feeling of paranoia into you as you can't quite tell how many deaths you've got left before it's all over, excellently putting you in Senua's traumatized shoes and getting you to doubt the nature of your reality just as much as she does. Failure can even be translated into something more hopeful with the right narrative framing. In Death Stranding, for example, dying is little more than an inconvenience. In-game time progresses and you might lose some cargo, but that's about it. Rather than being annoying though, this actually serves to make death itself just another mild inconvenience that you've got to grit your teeth and power through. And in many cases, it's less of a hassle to return to life via the magical Kojima Beach than it is to lose some parcels down a river. Death Stranding is full of these little bumps in the road that hinder your progress, but the game finds a weird sense of hope in never letting any of its various failure states hinder you that much, allowing you to slowly but surely progress through your journey through sheer force of will, much like the protagonist Sam. Actually, on that note, there's a lot to be said for turning the idea of failure on its head completely and using loss as a way to motivate people. Why do you think roguelikes got so popular all of a sudden? For years, the standard gameplay progression arc in a roguelike involved you trying your best, invariably dying, and then ideally learning some sort of lesson from it. For example, maybe don't rob people while a cat can see you because it will snitch. But with the advent of newer school roguelikes, beginning with Rogue Legacy and actually done well in other better games, dying presents a tangible reward to the player in the form of some new toys to play with or a chance to literally get stronger, turning what would otherwise be the low point of your engagement, you losing everything and getting sent back to the start, into a moment of excitement and new possibilities. I may have my gripes with this particular setup, but it's hard not to see why roguelikes with a hard progression system have been so popular. It is worth noting though, that in order for these post-failure consolation prizes to be effective, they need to immediately change the player's circumstances. It's easy to get excited about a permanent stat boost or a new starting class because these things are an immediate broadening of your options. But in something like Enter the Gungeon, which requires something like 10 minutes of rigmarole before you maybe get a chance to see that new gun you unlocked, it's hard to get too excited, and thus, losing and being faced with the possibility of another hour-long run without seeing anything new is daunting enough to get you to quit. Of course, the undisputed monarch of games that feature losing over and over again as a key theme, but still manage to frame themselves around always getting back up, is the beloved genre of Kingsfield-likes, known to casual gamers as soulslikes. The most obvious way Soulsy games achieve this effect is by having you drop your souls when you die. You know, like I talked about earlier with Shovel Knight. Bloodborne even goes a step further and sometimes makes you get revenge on the enemy that killed you, which is a great extra detail. But I think what deserves far more praise in Souls-like games is how FromSoft not just manage to make death interesting, but are able to psychologically condition you to power through getting smushed by a big boss over and over again. A key element of Dark Souls is perseverance, with players learning that if they improve with every death, eventually they'll win. And one of the most important ways that this is communicated is with obligatory early game big boys that you're absolutely not expected to stand a chance against your first time through. Whether it's the Vanguard Demon, Ludex Gundyr, Ganishiro, or this random ass werewolf, these guys will hit you with a death that feels kind of unfair right out the gate before immediately letting you enact some kind of revenge to seal in the lesson that not only is death not a big deal, chances are you'll fare much better if you just keep trying. Ludex Gundyr is designed to take you off guard with his surprise second phase, but otherwise he's pretty easy. These werewolves get downgraded to regular enemies once you actually have a weapon, dying to Ganishiro in the tutorial in effect rewards you with a cool grappling hook, and Elden Ring even gives you a nice easy tutorial boss to destroy once you've gotten killed by the grafted Psychon, only to immediately put you back in your place with a terrifying foe. Additionally, on a macro scale, FromSoft have only committed to this element of making it easy to charge back into the fray as time has gone on. Runs back to boss fights in older games like Dark Souls 1 are absolute marathons, and often end up completely taking the wind out of your vengeance sails long before you actually reach them. But in newer games like Elden Ring, stakes of Marika allow you to respawn just outside the boss fight, such that even dying never really manages to knock you out of that all-important Dark Souls zone that you need to be in to beat the hardest bosses. I think the recent mainstream success of soulslikes and quote-unquote hardcore games prove that there are some developers out there who understand that the capacity to lose can make our victories more meaningful, and done cleverly, can even enrich and amplify regular gameplay too. But I think just as much blame for games feeling like they fear failure lies on us players as well. Come on, who among us hasn't lost a soldier to an unlucky crit, or accidentally triggered a trap one time, and just sort of quit a game because we couldn't be bothered to deal with the inconvenience? I certainly have. Losing by nature doesn't feel good, and there's a real instinct to try and cheat our way out of it at every turn by, say, for example, reloading my save in Skyrim over and over so I could rob this guy with a bucket without getting caught. But does this aversion to loss actually make the game more fun? Rarely if ever, in my experience. Often, rolling with the punches and resisting that urge to have everything go perfectly actually pays off in the long run. When I was playing through Hitman 3, I habitually quick-saved constantly to ensure that whenever I got spotted, I could instantly reload and try again without having to play cat and mouse with the guards. But what this meant is that I was basically ignoring half the fun of the game, and so by switching to Master difficulty, that doesn't let you have multiple saves, rather than expecting me to play perfectly, Hitman actually freed me up to embrace the messy mistakes and desperate recoveries from improvised kills that make the game so fun. A lot of the time, I think it almost comes down to pride. I myself am guilty of having zero fun smashing my head against a difficult game for ages and eventually just quitting rather than simply admit that I'm not good enough and decide to enjoy the game on merely very hard difficulty for a change. This reaction to shield our ego ultimately causes us to run from experiences that would be great fun if we just opened ourselves up to failure. In fact, there are a bunch of games out there that play off this exact dynamic, titles where messing up is all part of the fun. Kerbal Space Program is great fun to toy around with, and facepalm as my latest Doom mission blows up in my face. Manipulating things in VR is often incredibly unwieldy, but there are some fantastic moments of clumsy terror in games like Half-Life Alyx as you run around lobbing boxes of head grabs because you accidentally unloaded your gun and you can't find the magazine. And in Trombone Champ, a quote-unquote rhythm game, it's basically impossible to play a listenable version of the song on your horrible out-of-tune trombone, and whether you enjoy the game basically comes down to how much you like making a complete fool out of yourself. And, you know, maybe there's something to be said for us over-prioritizing failure states in general. Not every game needs the possibility of a game over or for you to die in order for it to work, and a lot of the problems with badly executed failure states could be fixed by developers removing them outright. Celeste, for example, is a deviously hard platformer that is nevertheless incredibly generous with how it treats failure, putting you back a maximum of a few seconds if you die. This frees the game up to focus on these intense, precise platforming gauntlets, and the player to focus on never getting overwhelmed or punished too much for messing up, letting them make slow but steady progress up the mountain. Puzzle games too never usually contain much in the way of a discrete way to lose that isn't just using death as an obstacle. And that's because these sorts of external threats don't really work in a game where your motivation and the game's reward mechanism are both internal in nature. The only failure puzzle games really need is your failure to beat the puzzle. Anything else often just gets in the way. The same goes for more sandboxy stuff. Sable, which has loads of sand and quite a few boxes too, doesn't bother with health or enemies or danger despite the fact that it's an open world adventure game, and that's because Sable is all about finding out what kind of person you want to be, and it'll be pretty hard to focus on that stuff while wondering if this giant worm is going to eat you or not. I guess what I'm saying is that it hasn't really been that long since video games got started, and many of the foundational tropes and structures of the genre, particularly when it comes to something as fundamental as failure, still get bundled in, even if we don't really need them. Stuff like health, game overs, and even the concept of losing itself are a relic of the arcade age, and while they absolutely still have their place in games, developers don't need to include them as a matter of obligation anymore, nor should we as players expect them. Instead, by broadening our perspective on what failure means and how we can interpret it, we can open ourselves up to a variety of brand new experiences. From treating failure as a way to up the tension in a game, for it to convey an important narrative message, or simply as a way to encourage us to practice our skills and come back better, like what I've been doing, practicing a little bit of Mozart. And yes, you have just realised you've fallen into my trap. I've spent the last 20 minutes explaining why you're not allowed to criticise me for playing it badly, and now you've got to listen to me trying to play trombone. Ha 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 ha, idiots. Hello and welcome to the After the Video segment, that bit at the end of the video where you eagerly tab out on whatever game you're currently playing to pay rapt attention to the most important part of this particular episode. Why? Because I'm about to talk about some cool people who are much more deserving of your attention than me. First of all, an internet person I think you should be made aware of is Eli_handle_b.wav, which is a suitably silly name for one of my new favourite comedy YouTube channels. The entire shtick of the channel is to insert movie characters into games with some impressively seamless editing and brilliant comedic timing. Is it clever? Is it nuanced? Is it artistically meaningful? Yes it is. Yes to all three. Start with the Austin Powers in Mass Effect 1, it is great. But where would I be without singing the praises of my even greater patrons, who tirelessly work real jobs actually contributing to society so that I get to keep making dumb YouTube videos for all you cheapskates to enjoy. Patreon is the absolute best way to ensure videos like this one keep getting made. And I'll be honest, a donation of $1 for 1 month on Patreon is worth more money than you watching every single video I ever put out on YouTube. So in return, if you want to support the channel that way, I'll give you behind the scenes stuff, bonus extra game design goodness, and even my personal permission to turn on your ad blocker when watching my videos. And if you donate $10 and join the rest of my mysterious benefactors, however, you'll even earn the grand prize that is me saying your silly internet handle at the end of every video. Like these cool people, who are Alge, Andrew Lebrano, Asaran, Alno94, Barnick Dragoon, Bjorn Kala, Brennan Spalding, Brian Atariani, Constantine Amend, Corey Gerard, Cosmix360, Daniel Metjes, Das Kangaroo, David Setzer, Dirk Jan Karambeld, Dotwo, Digletia, Ekton, Edward Franklin Woods, Eugene Bulkin, Gazkul, Gretar Hannison, Jacob Dylan Riddle, Janos Fakete, Joey Bruno, Jordan Gear, Justin Dent, Lee Berman, Lucas Slack, MaceWindow54, Max Filipov, NWDD, Nate Graff, Patrick Romberg, Peter D. Tomasak, Philby the Bilby, Phoenix Thurikaz, Rajagar, Reddidex, Regal Regex, Ray's Dad, Sheldon Hearn, Simon Jacobson, Steve Riley, Strateger in Ultima, The Forbidden Shrimp, Tin Markovic, T-Corn, Tyler Duncan, Whimsical Wisp, Zach Grendel, and ciao. Okay, that's it, that's all. I'll see you next time. Bye!